Hannah!
Andrew!
I'm so glad that you could join me here for another episode of Pause It For Me. Spoopy season is upon us.
Yay!
And that means it's the time to get all cozy and just eat some soups and breads and just get all fat and sassy. But that also means it's the time to watch some horror-related movies.
Mm-hmm.
And today we watched 1931's Dracula, the original Universal picture starring Bela Lugosi, as well as 1984's Return of the Living Dead, which was quite the wild ride.
Oh, it was so much fun.
But one thing that I want to ask you, we've hinted at this a couple of times, mentioned it outright in past episodes, but this time I want to dive a little deeper. So when it comes to Dracula, I have seen the 1931 version. I saw it when I was probably 13 in grade 8 on Halloween of grade 8.
Ooh, fancy.
We watched it after trick-or-treating.
Nice.
But I haven't seen it since then, and I've seen the Francis Ford Coppola version. We watched that together.
Oh, man, that was a ride.
And I've seen various other various videos describing Dracula and Dracula movies in detail.
Course.
But for some reason, I always get confused by the plot. So you have never seen the Bela Lugosi version before today, but you have, in fact, taken a vampire class in college.
Indeed.
So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that was a really interesting class, especially for someone like me that, I don't know. I hesitate to call myself a goth, but like in some ways I am. I sometimes like indulging in the macabre. So it was fun for me to take a vampire class.
I mean, on most given days, I'm listening to you listen to like murder-related podcasts.
Yeah. For some reason, it's a trend with adult women. It's just, I don't know. Psychologically, I think maybe we like to peek behind the curtain a little bit so we feel more safe. Something like that.
That doesn't make any sense to me, but sure.
What do you mean?
You feel more safe by listening to murderous stories that are true?
Because you know not what.
You know not what you do.
You know what not to do, you know? I don't know.
I mean, can you give us an example? What have you learned to keep yourself safe from those podcasts?
Well, just to like, you know, to screw
You're
politeness.
Not convincing me.
No, to screw politeness because a lot of times, you know, strangers will approach people and they'll just take them at face value and then do things to be polite, and it puts them in danger. And it's like, if you're getting a bad vibe from someone, you have a right to not be polite to them.
Hashtag Dracula.
Hashtag Dracula. That's right. I mean, Mina shouldn't have been polite to Dracula, you know?
But we'll get there. So the vampire class.
The vampire class. That was a really fun class because I'm someone that loves, you know, interesting history, pop culture, literature, movies, and it was all of that. So we went into the details of the lore. You know, we discussed different vampire versions in pop culture, television show adaptations, and of course, Dracula. As a kid, I had read the book already.
Oh, as a kid you read it?
Yeah.
I thought you read it as part of the class.
No. When I was a kid, I read a bunch of, like gothic literature, like Edgar Allan Poe, Frankenstein, Dracula. So as a kid, I read this. So that partially lended myself to enjoying this class already because I already had a base foundation. So we definitely discussed Bela Lugosi. We watched Nosferatu in class.
Excellent movie.
Yes. The version I saw, though, was kind of bad, though, because it had like a stock orchestra track, which just, it didn't lend itself to the experience as much.
Right. Well, we've mentioned this in the past. Part of the reason we love Nosferatu so much, we're biased towards it, because when we saw it in a theater with a live prog rock band doing the music, which elevated the experience exponentially.
Definitely. I mean, silent movies were kind of intended to be played with live music.
Yeah.
So.
And I'll get into music in a little bit when we get into the topic of Dracula, but continue.
Yeah. So we discussed all things relating to Dracula because he's kind of like the OG vampire in some regards. He's kind of like the king of the vampires. So we discussed this and Bram Stoker's adaptation of vampirism and how he set like a lot of trends for what vampires do and don't do in the lore.
Okay, now this is filling in a gap in my knowledge here, because maybe I'm dumb in this regard.
Okay.
But I kind of assumed that the idea of vampirism came from Dracula. Is that not true?
I think it was perpetuated
Okay.
by the novel, but it was around a lot longer than that. Whether it was called specifically vampirism or not, it depended on lore, but a lot of lore was like, someone is going around doing things at night, spooking people out, biting them, like kind of stuff like that.
Sure.
So, you know, that could maybe fall under the camp of zombieism, which kind of like they both have similar vibes.
Yeah.
Like sometimes in zombie adaptations, they're all about like just kind of like biting into people. Kind of like vampires. And sometimes in some zombie adaptations, like the one we watched today, they just want brains. And with Dracula, he just wants blood to stay youthful.
Right.
So yeah, that was really fascinating. It was really fun because a lot of the classes were just us like reading like chapters out of books and discussing them, or like watching movies and discussing them and stuff.
Right.
It's really fun.
Well, so I don't think I really need to explain what Dracula is about, but for the sake of trend in our podcast, I'll read the logline. Transylvanian vampire Count Dracula bends a naive real estate agent to his will, then takes up residence at a London estate, where he sleeps in his coffin by day and searches for potential victims by night. So what is there to say about this that hasn't already been said? Well, I'm going to try and find something, because I hear nothing but praise for this movie.
There's a lot of good things going for it, for sure.
And the person who has introduced me to more, classic films than I can count via the internet, that being James Rolfe, and who inspired me in many, many ways. This is one of his favorite movies of all time, and he talks about it constantly. And actually, one video that I love, and I hope you love it too, Hannah, because I've made you watch it.
Interesting.
I've made you watch it many a time, and I'm going to make you watch it again as soon as this podcast is over.
I would expect nothing less.
Is this long video that James Rolfe has where he compares like 12 or 15 or so different movie adaptations of Dracula to see how accurate they are to the source material. So James Rolfe loves Dracula, and I've watched many a James Rolfe video discussing Dracula in depth. But when it comes to this movie, I just don't quite see it.
Here's the thing. It's way better than Frankenstein.
Well, yeah. So last year we watched the Universal Frankenstein, which came out around the same time. And this definitely was better than Frankenstein. However, I had the same complaint for both movies, which is that they're way too quiet because there's no music. And
that was a trend back then.
Yeah, I mentioned that can work to a certain degree. If you have music in some parts of the film and then choose to have a silent moment to really punctuate how creepy something is, that can really work and be effective. But just to have the entire film be silent really takes away some of the power that some moments could have.
I'm wondering, because we're coming, like, this is like such a new era of talkies. Like, for some people, this was their first talkie production. I'm wondering if they still played live music at the theaters or not, and maybe that's why it's quiet. Okay,
so I'll dive into a little bit of trivia here. I didn't think I would need to get into the trivia for Dracula because it's such an interesting movie with so much history surrounding it. Yeah, but this fills in the conversation pretty nicely. So there was no real musical soundtrack in the film because it was believed that, with sound being such a recent innovation in films, the audience would not accept hearing music in a scene if there was no explanation for it being there. Example, the orchestra playing off camera when Dracula meets Mina in the theater.
Oh, I see.
I think that was a poor choice.
Well, it's because they're new to it, so they're dumb.
Wow. Okay. But
they don't realize how powerful it can be to have a a track of, I always forget which one it is. Is it non-diegetic?
Non-diegetic, yeah.
Yeah.
Diegetic means it's happening within the world of the characters,
Right.
and they can hear it.
Yeah, it can be really powerful, but I think they, especially back then, they were worried about taking things a little too literally, you know?
I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the medium was still in its infancy, you know? They only had a couple
Definitely.
decades of music there. But I just felt like this could have been such an easily certified classic if it had music, especially because of
For
the way
sure.
that it started. It starts and you hear the and I'm like, yes, iconic. Okay, let's
Yeah,
get into
for
it.
sure.
And there was a lot to love about this movie. Like Bela Lugosi's performance is magnetic. Visually, it's iconic.
Yeah, he definitely became the archetype forever. Like, if you think of Dracula, it's him.
Yeah,
So.
that first shot that you see of him, where they do that slow dolly into him standing like a statue, like they knew.
Cool.
It's like they knew it was going to be iconic.
Oh yeah.
You know,
yeah.
and every close up of his eyes just looking so intense, everything that he brought to like the weird way that he stands and moves in the performance
Amazing.
was awesome. Some of the side characters were lacking a little bit, but they're not really there to steal the show. But
Yeah.
Dwight Fry as Renfield, I thought was fantastic.
Yeah, he was good.
The way that he transitions between, you know, like kind of mild-mannered at the beginning and then deranged and mad, as they say, only like a few minutes in, was such a great turn.
For
you
sure.
know, like when you first see him after he becomes Dracula's slave, he almost for a second seems like a different actor. You know, because that guy's range is so nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I liked his creepy smile.
Yeah, it was excellent.
He definitely played Renfield well. Like, reading the book, just kind of the maniacal nature of him, it is close to what I would picture as Renfield, for sure.
Totally. And so I'm going to rely on you a little bit here in a second for accuracy to the source material. And I know you read it a long time ago, but I will pick your brain about it a little bit. But just wrapping up on the music, I just felt like that would have been such a nice way to seal the deal on this movie standing the test of time. But because there's no music, it does feel really dated.
Yeah, of course. It would be interesting to see it at like a theater with music underneath. I think it would be like probably 10 times better with cool music underneath.
Yeah. I probably made the same comment when we watched Frankenstein last year, but I would be interested to see online if people have added their own score to this movie.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because I think it would be easy. There's no score to remove,
easy.
So you just put one underneath.
Well, yeah, that's just what it made it so much worse. Like, at least for times with Dracula, it's like there was an ominous feeling.
Yeah.
But like it just would have enhanced the experience just to add in like at least some in some parts, you know?
Speaking of putting a custom soundtrack under a movie that didn't
goodness.
originally have it. What?
No, go for it.
What are you assuming I'm going to say right now?
I thought you were going to transition to the next film, which I really love their soundtrack.
Oh, well, we're not done on Dracula yet.
We'll chat about that.
I was just going to say on the top, now that James Rolfe is on my mind, he posted a video or a couple of videos like over a decade ago where he put AC/DC music over scenes in First Blood. Ooh. And that was cool.
That sounds fun.
That's something I would love to see people do more. So coming back to accuracy to the source material, we were both a little confused when the movie started because we had watched the Francis Ford Coppola Dracula less than a year ago, or maybe just around a year ago.
It all blends together. We might have seen Dracula a year ago, or it might have been like 2 years ago.
Right. And this is what I keep saying. Every time I'm exposed to a Dracula film or anything Dracula related, I always feel like I ingest the plot and then 2 hours later I forget it, which is why I rewatched that video so many times comparing all the different versions of Dracula.
Yeah, well, I mean, you also have ADHD, so it's hard for you to latch onto some ideas sometimes because your brain is moving like a million miles a minute.
Sorry, I have no idea what you just said. I wasn't listening. But anyway.
Very funny.
We were confused watching this because Renfield came on screen, and I knew what Dwight Fry's face looked like, and I knew what Renfield looked like in this film. And so when he came on screen, I knew it was Renfield. And I said to you, I'm pretty sure that's Renfield. And you were like, what? That's supposed to be Jonathan Harker. And I was like, are you sure? And you were like, I'm pretty sure. So let me ask you about that. What was going on with like the different characters filling in different roles? Like, because I seem to remember Jonathan Harker being more important in the Francis Ford Coppola version. And I don't even really remember Renfield in the Francis Ford Coppola version.
Yeah. here's the thing. Okay. In the book, it's really fascinating the way that they break it down. It's almost like the Victorian version of the Blair Witch Project, if this makes sense. Is the structure of the book is supposed to be letters back and forth, and mostly it's letters like Jonathan sends to Mina, Mina sends to Jonathan, Lucy sends to Mina, describing their experiences as they're happening.
Right, okay.
So it's supposed to be kind of like, not like found footage, but like found letters, kind of make it like seem like based on a true story kind of vibe.
Yeah,
realistic.
Fair enough. The Martian is kind of written in that same way, but it's like diary entries. So it's everything's like after the fact. He's like, let me tell you about my day yesterday.
It is a little bit confusing, and it can be a little bit daunting just because it was written in Victorian time, and I feel like whenever I read Victorian fiction, it just feels so much denser, and it's a little bit harder to get through. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Jonathan is supposed to be like a real estate agent that goes to see Count Dracula. Oh my goodness, Count Dracula.
Count Dracula.
Yeah, and I think the reason why they combined him with Renfield is just to make it easier and to give like one of the characters more screen time. I think the idea is Jonathan is supposed to be the catalyst for everything that's happening. Like, you know, he meets Dracula. You know, Dracula comes back with him. He introduces
in the source
to
material,
him to Mina. Yeah, exactly.
Not in this movie.
In this movie, like they kind of reduced him, whereas Renfield is more supposed to be kind of like a smaller character. Like, to my remembrance of the novel, it's like Jonathan is there on business, and then the weird sisters, like those three ladies that you see at the beginning, they like trap him, and they're like they're feeding on him for like a month. And he's like stuck under their control, like hypnotized, and then he is able to like break away, and then eventually Dracula like chases after him like on a boat like later. And I think it's like you see like a newspaper article, or you like someone is writing to someone about the newspaper article of like a boat where everyone's like dead, and it's like
we saw that newspaper in this movie.
Yeah, so you assume it's like, oh, it's Dracula. And then Dracula comes by, he hypnotizes Renfield, he becomes like the slave character, and then like eventually, you know, Dracula goes after Lucy, and it's supposed to be kind of an ongoing thing, and vampirism as like a theme is like morality, which is why, you know, Dracula doesn't like crosses and stuff, because it's like supposed to be like holy water, that kind of thing, because he's, you know, supposed to be like,
because Dracula has such great morals.
No, he's against it, you know, like he's supposed to be like kind of like a face of evil, you know. So one reason why he goes after Lucy first, and they go into it in the books and in the Coppola version, is she's supposed to be like a bit of like a player, like she's like dating several men, and like she's maybe seen as a little bit more promiscuous in the Victorian times, so she's a little more like I hate to like
get there.
In
bring it home.
In Victorian times, she was maybe seen as more unpure, so that was maybe more appealing to Dracula as like a first victim. But then he like obviously has a soft spot for Mina and everything, and that's all kind of similar.
Soft spot's one way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I remember most of that happening to Keanu Reeves in the Francis Ford Coppola version, but in this, it felt like Jonathan Harker lifted right out. Like I feel like you could cut him out and not lose very much.
Yeah.
Which is just like, why give his role to Renfield then? Because like, then he really almost doesn't matter to the plot at all.
Exactly. You know, they kind of made Renfield the star of the show. So, or like other than Lugosi. So.
Yeah. Well, as much as I'm giving praise to this, we're dancing around the fact that even if this movie had had music, I don't think, like, it would have stood the test of time, sure, but I don't think it really deserves to be among the classics of film, let's say. Like, obviously the character is super iconic, but I just don't think that the plot of Dracula is very good. To me, it's one of those stuff happens movies.
Yeah.
I don't think it's written particularly well. I don't think there's any really good plant and payoff. I don't think the plot doesn't really make sense to me. Like I said, just kind of like this happens, and then
Pretty
after
much.
that this happens, and then this happens, and then like that's owing to the source material. But then
Yeah, it's all past tense and letters.
yeah, couple that with the fact that there's no music, it leads to ultimately spoilers. What is one of the most anticlimactic moments
That was
in a
terrible.
movie ever, which is like one of the most iconic and famous movie villains of all time. Dracula is killed with no fanfare off screen, and then the movie just kind of ends. It's like,
He's
yep,
like,
the
"You
end. It's
guys
Universal
leave, the
Picture.
end."
Yep.
Well, even worse still was Frankenstein, which came out, like a couple years later, where there was like that added scene at the end with like Dr. Frankenstein's dad or
Someone's dad. I
someone's
remember
dad,
that,
and
yeah.
he's like, "Oh, ho, ho, ho," and I was like, why do we need the scene? What's adding to this?
Yeah. If you want to hear more about our thoughts on the Universal Frankenstein, that is, you can go back and watch our previous episode from last year around October from
For
season
sure.
1.
Yeah, like the idea of the Universal monsters, like they definitely created like such great lore and started something really great. But I feel like looking back, a lot of 1930s movies are a hard pill to swallow because they were transitioning from, the silent era to talkies, and they were kind of having trouble. Like it was a little rough going. And then by the 40s, they really found their stride. And then I think cinema gets a lot better and it's a lot more modern to what we know by that point. Because
Yeah.
we have films like His Girl Friday, which is amazing. We have Rebecca, which is great. So on and so on. And then it gets gradually better from there as, more filmmakers understand talkies and how to use music in film and how to, adapt to be more subtle performances compared to the silent era where you had to do everything big. So it's just, I don't know. And take it with what it is, the 1930s movie,
Yeah, again, as much as we have been complaining a little bit lately of going through our lesson in film history, as I've called it, the whole point of that was to start early in the 1910s and work our way through chronologically so that by the time we hit the 1930s, we had a good idea of what movies were like in the decades prior to that, and we were able to appreciate it for what it was doing at the time.
For sure.
As opposed to watching it through a 2023 lens and being like, it was kind of boring.
Yeah, well, like if you look back like a couple of years before Dracula, you got Metropolis, which is great in scale, but in terms of performances, maybe a little lacking.
Well, apples and oranges,
Sure.
silent film.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll rattle off a couple pieces of trivia right real quick here, and it'll be really nice and cool. Hannah, get ready for this piece of trivia. It's going to be awesome. Strap
my
your butts
body
in.
is ready, yeah.
Dracula never once blinks his eyes, an
Ooh.
effect that enhances the undead character's otherworldly aura, abetted by Bela Lugosi's famous menacing stare.
Mm-hmm.
Effective.
Nice.
While it is rumored that Bela Lugosi could not speak English very well and had to learn his lines phonetically, this is not true. Lugosi was speaking English as well as he ever would by the time this was filmed.
Well, considering he played Dracula on Broadway prior to this film, that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And that I didn't even really know that. So when the film opened and it was like adapted from the stage play version, I was like, oh, interesting. And that leads right into my next piece of trivia. Bela Lugosi was so eager to repeat his stage success and play the Count Dracula role for the film version that he agreed to a contract paying him $500 per week for a 7-week shooting schedule.
Mm-hmm.
A paltry sum, even during the days of the Depression.
It's one of those roles where it's like it's a life-defining career move to be in it, but it also is like it kind of taints everything else you're in because everyone's gonna see you as Dracula forever.
Yeah,
So.
I suppose. One other thing that I can say is a small complaint about this film is just that it really had to censor itself in terms of some of the more gory moments.
And that didn't lend well to the ending.
Yeah, like I understand. I know that film audiences at the time, as Marty McFly would say, guess you're not ready for that yet. But your kids are going to love it.
Yeah, pretty much.
But what it led to is like anytime Dracula bites someone, they don't show it.
Yeah.
Anything, kind of remotely gory or interesting that happens, even like Dracula turning into a bat, like you could argue that the effects weren't there yet to do that at the time, but I think only a couple of years later, or maybe just around the same time, they had the effect of the Wolfman turning into the werewolf.
For sure. Well, he turned into a werewolf off screen.
Exactly. They could have found some way to do it.
Just have a dog.
But then again, the big one at the end of the movie when Dracula gets a stake through the heart, it's done not only off screen, but when you see the character about to do it, he's like almost way in the background with his back turned to the camera.
And he's opening a box, so you can't even really see Bela.
Yeah.
She's like, is there a way that we could have shot it more like the close up of like the biting? Where it's like we see him about to stake Bela or something and then cut away. At least that's a little more satisfying.
Right. So, as somebody who had read the novel and had seen the Francis Ford Coppola version and had not seen this version yet, how did this stack up to your expectations?
It was about what I expected. But I kind of knew a lot going into it that a lot of versions of the novel kind of decide to take creative license and just kind of take what they want from it and leave out what they want from it. So, I mean, Coppola was pretty faithful to the book, except they added like some weird scenes with Mina.
You could put it that way, sure.
More fantastical moments and stuff, but in general, it was more faithful. Like, they had all that stuff with Jonathan and everything, so...
So what would you rate it out of 10, out of 5, however you want to rate it?
Well, I was really happy to see Bela in the role, and all that was really great, and it was a better experience than than Frankenstein by far. So, maybe like a 7. Like, there was some really good moments to it, but it was also like it had like the 1930s-ism where it was like a lot of lame stuff as well. I did like the shot of the mirror, the cigarette box lid of the mirror showing the reflection. I was happy they did something with that because that happens in the book where like Jonathan's like going to like shave his face or something, and then Dracula comes up behind him and like he's like, oh, I didn't see him in the mirror. What the heck? And he like cuts himself shaving, and like Dracula's like visibly like disturbed, kind of like the paperclip thing.
Yeah.
Apparently in the stage play though, they had like a giant mirror doing that effect, and they were kind of like,
how?
I don't know. I didn't read like so much into that, but like the actors were kind of like, why in the movie didn't you do like a giant mirror? You just did like a little cigarette box thing. But either way, it was effective. So
probably, if I had to guess, I would say if they used a mirror that was too big, you'd see the camera.
That's probably it.
Which stage actors probably wouldn't account for.
That's true. So
that's true.
That's smart.
True. I would struggle to give it a 7. I would probably give it a 6 out of 10. Just because, like, yes, it deserves music, but even on top of that, like, it's just not that great.
No. I mean...
Like, again, there's a lot to like about it, but plot-wise, I'm like, whatever.
I just feel like a lot of 1930s movies leave a bad taste in my mouth. Like, they're just falling short of what they can be, and that's later fulfilled later down the line in cinema. So it's just hard for me as a like barometer to be like, it's like they have to leave a lot of stuff out, and because of budget reasons, or just like they don't know how to do effects yet. Things are a little more boring, and they tell instead of showing, and it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's certainly better 1930s movies. I mean,
such as
Gone with the Wind was better.
That was late in the era, though, wasn't it? It was like 38.
Well, okay then, 39, but who's counting?
Well, that's what made it like, record-breaking, like everyone's favorite movie, Oscar award-winning, is because it was like so astounding to what like what the world had seen thus far as what you could do in cinema.
Yeah, Heidi.
Sure, Heidi's
better. Cute. I mean, again, that's late 30s.
The grandfather.
But I mean, in terms of like the movies that we'd been watching lately, I mean, we watched King Kong and we were kind of...
Oh, that was underwhelming.
Yeah. Wizard of Oz. Again, late 30s.
Wizard of Oz is good.
but you know.
Yeah, by that time they'd maybe figured out a few things.
Yeah.
There's more music in The Wizard of Oz.
I guess if I had to put the nail in the coffin, so to speak, I'd probably say the 1930s, my least favorite decade of films overall.
Oh, 100%, yeah. Because, like, at least in the silent era, you saw what they were trying to do. And, like, I feel like the limitation at least lended itself to the experience of it. Like, you were leaning into the kitsch almost.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with the 30s, it's just a little stilted and boring.
Right. Well, in addition to Dracula,
Talk about kitsch.
we also watched another movie called Return of the Living Dead. And now you might actually think that this is a sequel to Night of the Living Dead, and it's kind of a sequel to Night of the Living Dead. So this is a movie that came out in 1984. Well, maybe filmed in 84, came out in 85.
The credits in the like the cue cards in the movie was like 1984, blah 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 blah.
Yeah, directed by Dan O'Bannon. Mm-hmm. And here's the logline. When two bumbling employees at a medical supply warehouse accidentally release a deadly gas into the air, the vapors cause the dead to rise again as zombies. Now, so this is a really interesting set of circumstances here that I've only seen in only one other movie comes to mind that has done this, where it's not a sequel to a movie. It's not really a spiritual sequel to a movie. I mean, it kind of is, but spiritual sequels are usually done by the same director. But it's like...
It's meta, almost.
It's meta. So basically what happens is the characters in the movie refer to Night of the Living Dead. They're like, oh, you see that movie, Night of the Living Dead? This is like that movie when the dead start to rise again.
Yeah.
But it's different in that it follows different rules of zombieism than Night of the Living Dead does. The Night of the... That's a mouthful. The Night of the Living Dead zombies and the Dawn of the Dead zombies, they're slow... They're not smart. They don't talk. They're just after brains or whatever. And
I think they just kind of bite anything.
Yeah, that's that.
Yeah.
Whereas the zombies in this, like, they can be fast occasionally, but they're a lot smarter. Like
they have wherewithal.
Yeah, they have wherewithal. They know how to use simple machines and pulleys to exert force enough to open a door.
Yeah, the zombies are like, bring more paramedics.
Yeah, they know how to speak.
Yeah.
They know how to lay traps. And that was extremely interesting.
That was really spooky.
Other than that, it abides by pretty typical like horror movie cliches, zombie movie cliches, and standard plot lines for a zombie movie. We start out with a big group, and they each kind of fall off one by one. But
there's something comforting about that, though.
The style that it did it in, I was really pleased with.
It was really fun.
Yeah.
Like, I think the soundtrack added a lot to that.
It was a great soundtrack.
And just like the characters, like the punk characters, really interesting. So
yeah, as far as 80s movies goes, there's certain movies, like modern movies or modern TV shows, that look at the 80s. They have like a flashback to the 80s, and they show like people with colored mohawks and like leather jackets with studs and stuff and bright socks, and you're like, did anyone in the 80s actually dress like that, or is that just what we think the 80s is? But then this movie, 1985, shows a whole group of punk teenagers dressed exactly like that, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess people really did dress like that in the 80s.
I mean, like, there's supposed to be heightened versions of like an alternative crowd.
Oh yeah.
So, but yeah, I don't think, like, obviously people like Bert and Ernie didn't dress like that, so...
Speaking of which, apparently that naming was a coincidence.
That's funny.
The character of Bert and Ernie were not named after the Sesame Street Muppets.
Huh. Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
There was definitely some really spooky elements about that, like the yellow man in the beginning. That was frightening.
Yeah.
Oh, the little puppy. So weird.
I should be clear. We're talking about a literally colored yellow man. We're not trying to be like
yeah.
over here.
Sorry, that didn't even occur to me because I wouldn't think to say that.
Okay, moving on. But I agree with you. There are a lot of legitimately creepy effects in this.
Yeah.
And the beginning of the movie started with the credits rolling over a skull with like a wax face melting. And I don't even know if this was before or after Raiders of the Lost Ark, which obviously has a very famous face melting scene.
Yeah.
But this looked as easily as good, if not maybe even better than the face melting in
Right.
Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was legitimately creepy.
Mm-hmm.
And the zombie character who ends up getting his face melted is like very, very unnerving
Yeah, it
and
is
scary when
unnerving.
he like gets up. Like I get particularly freaked out by the stop motion effects of the T-800 at the end of the first Terminator movie.
Sure.
But I think that the zombie covered in tar in this movie rivals that in terms of creepiness. Like
and he
there's
could talk and stuff.
yeah, there's a shot of one character being chased by him up the stairs, and one of the stairs breaks and it gets stuck. And the way that the camera is framed, you see the character being chased in the foreground and the tar zombie in the background. And I said out loud, I was like, "That's scary."
That is scary because it's like you want to feel like you're in the character's shoes, being like, "Oh, she can run away," and then she gets stuck, and it's like, "Oh no, she's done for."
Yeah. Apparently, they rigged that step to break without telling the actress, so that was a real reaction.
Well, that's smart, but also not that kind.
Yeah.
To the actor.
But as far as horror movies go, this was effective in that there were a
Mhm.
couple of times that I heard you like yelp and turn your eyes away from the screen. You know, like when a character got bit on the head, or when something got sliced open, you're like, ah!
Well, here's the thing: is I generally enjoy kind of like dark comedy type stuff, some macabre type stuff.
Yeah, like
but
you're normally not squeamish. You're normally fine.
I don't like gore. So seeing like a zombie eat someone's head, ugh, freaky.
I can't point to any specific moment before watching this movie where it seemed like you were freaked out by gore. Maybe The Thing, but again,
That is spooky.
That's a very gross, gore-heavy movie that's freaky.
I think a lot of the stuff we watch, though, it doesn't take itself too seriously.
Fair, yeah.
Like Dawn of the Dead, I don't remember too many gratuitous gore moments.
There were definitely gratuitous gore moments in Dawn of the Dead, but they didn't look real. They didn't look particularly real. Maybe
just because some of it looked a little bit more real in this one, I was a little more spooked. If it looks fake, like I'm not going to be, I can see the behind the curtains or, the mist or that kind of thing. So
yeah. Well, I think the reason why we liked this movie was because, again, like you just said, we tend to draw more towards horror movies that don't take themselves too seriously and have a good degree of comedy in them. So
this is definitely in the camp of like Evil Dead.
Yeah, Evil Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Nightmare on Elm Street, and this definitely did that. I mean, you had
for sure.
You had again zombies setting kind of goofy traps, and then
this is like New Nightmare because it's kind of like taking place in the same universe.
Yeah. And then like other zombies running around completely naked and doing dances and stuff, and it was a fun time. So what I was going to say earlier, the only other example that I've seen that comes to mind of a sort of sequel like this is the movie Son of Rambo. Have you heard of this movie?
No.
This is a movie that's about two kids who find like a VHS copy of Rambo and get obsessed with it and start to reenact it and all that because they love it so much.
Well, something that kind of springs to mind is maybe My Name is Bruce.
Okay,
a little bit in that same sort of camp, like Bruce Campbell being himself, releasing Deadites.
Yeah.
So
why don't you give the audience a quick little rundown of that movie?
Well, I've only seen the first scene.
Oh, you haven't seen it?
No.
Oh.
We
haven't watched it together?
No, it was kind of like Bruce Campbell's kind of like an imitation of himself, and he like accidentally opens like the Book of the Dead, and then he has to like deal with it.
Something like that. So yeah, basically it's like some evil spirit gets released in a small town, and fans of Evil Dead come to Bruce Campbell and be like, you gotta help us with this. And he's like, okay, yeah, sure, because he thinks they're talking about making another movie. And then he goes to help, and then once he realizes it's real, he runs away like a coward. But maybe he
don't blame him.
Maybe
honestly.
he comes back. I'll never tell.
I mean, in a zombie movie, what kind of role would you fit into? Would you try to barricade yourself off? Kind of like, I want to say his name is Dwayne in the original one, or if that was just the actor's name. Barricade yourself off, hope to like stay till morning. Kind of thing, or would you be proactive, trying to get in the car, shoot people down?
I don't think I would put myself in harm's way so easily, But I think like as soon as you find out that something is wrong, the clock is ticking to gain as much ground as possible before zombies spread out.
Yeah.
So
it's
I would
terrifying.
be like, hey, we gotta make a quick plan and get to the safest possible place where we'll be barricaded enough from zombies, but we'll have enough space to like live. Which is what made Dawn of the Dead such a perfect choice, is to go in a shopping mall where they had everything that they would ever need, basically, as opposed to Night of the Living Dead, where it's like, okay, they're trapped in a house. How long could they possibly stay there
Yeah.
before having to leave the house? And then, oops, the zombies get them as soon as they step out.
It was definitely an interesting level up. It's like, I think Night of the Living Dead is kind of everyone's first instinct. And then kind of Dawn of the Dead took it to the next level.
Right. Well, I got a couple pieces of fun trivia here for Return of the Living Dead. So the first one is, the filmmakers had to get approval from Lysol to have Frank spray away the stench of death with their product. Apparently,
That's funny.
they liked the idea that Lysol would kill any conceivable odor.
Sure. That's funny.
On the back of Freddy's jacket in the theatrical version, the words "F*** you" are displayed. After realizing that the shot cannot be used in case it was ever shown on TV, a second jacket was made that says television version.
It says television version?
Apparently.
That's
yeah.
really funny.
That's amazing. So one thing that I realized after we watched the movie is, by accident, we watched two movies back to back that had the same actor in it. Now, to clarify for the audience, we watched Return of the Living Dead first, and then we watched Dracula. But we watched two movies back to back that had Miguel A. Nunez Jr. in it. And that was the black man in Return of the Living Dead.
Okay.
Did you recognize having seen him extremely recently?
No.
He played the voodoo guy in Scooby-Doo, which we watched yesterday.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's really weird. Well, this movie came out in 85, and Scooby-Doo came out in 2001? It's 20 years
somewhere
older.
along that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So-
so weird.
But anyway, apparently he was homeless when he was cast in this movie.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I hoped it helped him get out of the streets.
Me too.
Seems like it.
So, one thing that I wanted to talk about is the relationship that this has to the original Night of the Living Dead. And so I'll read this piece of trivia here that will hopefully shine a little bit of light on it.
Mm-hmm.
So, John A. Russo, one of the writers on this film, had previously teamed up with George A. Romero to make Night of the Living Dead.
Mm-hmm.
Afterwards, both men had different ideas for sequels, so they parted ways, and Russo started working on an adaptation of a novel he had written called Return of the Living Dead,
Mm-hmm.
while Romero was making Dawn of the Dead. An independent producer, Tom Fox, bought Russo's script. He set up production and gave the script to Dan O'Bannon. However, O'Bannon refused to direct it as written. He felt it was too much of a serious attempt to make a sequel to Night of the Living Dead and did not want to intrude so directly on Romero's turf.
Fair enough.
It was rewritten to occur in a fictional universe where Night of the Living Dead is a movie based on true events, with more humor, up to the point where it only superficially resembled the novel.
I enjoyed it just because, Dawn of the Dead's great, Night of the Living Dead's great, but it was fun to see something maybe a little bit different. It's also kind of spooky in one regard, is you basically can't kill the zombies. And that's
Yeah.
kind of terrifying, because it's at least in other adaptations, it's oh, you smack them in the head, or, you shoot them and they're dead. But in this, it's no, you have to burn them completely. And it's ooh, that's spooky.
Yeah. And such a unique scenario outside the realm of the film, in that this is an example of two different series of sequels to the same, or sort of sequels to the same one movie, right? So you have Night of the Living Dead, Return of the Living Dead, Return of the Living Dead 2. I heard there were more sequels.
Yeah.
And then you have Dawn of the Dead, Land of the Dead, Day of the Dead,
Right.
Diary of the Dead.
Diary of the Dead.
Yeah. And then that's, I think, is another found footage movie.
Oh, interesting.
Also, I think it's also by George Romero.
I ate brains today.
But then there's another example of a different line of sequels to the same movie, in that if you've watched the James Rolfe, coming back to him again, Chronologically Confused video, you know that Dawn of the Dead was recut to be a movie called Zombie, and then there were
Right,
additional
yeah.
sequels to the movie Zombie. So that's like 3 different offshoots of sequels that all stem from the original Night of the Living Dead. I find that very interesting.
I think it's such a simple concept, zombieism, that there's a lot of different things that you can do with it, and I can see why it splintered off the way it did.
Right. So I thought this was great. I'm going to give this an easy 8 out of 10.
It's very fun, and the soundtrack definitely helps. Like during some of the more like intense moments, there was just like a really fun kind of like spooky but like jaunty kind of track, like and stuff like that. And there was it's like some surf punk music. Like I looked it up like later, and it featured a lot of California punk music.
Right.
And I was like, that makes so much sense. And a particular band, specifically the Cramps, which are kind of like known for that surf punk vibe, were in the movie. And I was like, oh, I knew it. So that just kind of adds to the fun, like especially all the punks and like all that kind of silliness worked in. So
Yeah, well, I imagine the Cramps are having a resurgence right now because of being used in Wednesday.
yes, exactly.
Yes,
Goo Goo
exactly.
Muck.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a fun track.
Oh, yes, Goo Goo Muck.
Oh,
indeed,
yes, of course. So yeah, that was a lot of fun, and I would definitely rewatch this. I know Bytown Cinema, one of our local cinemas, does drunken cinema nights where they show this, where you're supposed to like drink during like certain scenes.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
I like that.
So I would definitely maybe like go to showing like that, or show it to friends in the future. Definitely a lot of fun. I would definitely revisit it later on. I would give it like an easy 8 as well.
Rad. Right on.
Yeah, right on, dude.
So this is officially going to be our Halloween episode, but we're actually watching it still smack dab in the middle of October. It's October
Spooky Halloween
15th right now. So we're gonna go on and we're gonna watch some more spooky movies.
Mm-hmm.
Probably won't talk about them on mic, but everybody enjoy your Halloweens.
Yeah.
And look forward to the next episode of Pause It For Me.
Yeah, make sure to eat a lot of treats and watch a lot of movies.
And get plenty of tummy aches and then get somebody to pat your tummy.
That sounds great.
Cool.
Take care.
Let's do that. Okay, bye.